The day I bought 58 acres of farmland just outside Willowbrook HOA, I didn't know I had just signed a death warrant for a neighborhood tyrant. I found out 3 weeks later when Karen Pemberton showed up at my gate with bolt cutters. Channel 7 news cameras rolling. Karen screaming, steel shrieking as she attacked my locked gate like a lunatic. She kept yelling that I had no right to block her, that my land was community access, that I would regret this. What she didn't realize is that this little stretch of useless farmland was the only thing keeping her entire operation standing. And the moment she touched that gate on live television, she triggered a chain of events that unraveled 12 years of stolen money, threats, and destroyed families. Trust me, by the time I was done with Karen Pemberton, she'd learn exactly what regret really looks like. Drop your location in the comments. Where are you watching from tonight? Because this revenge story is about to get absolutely wild. Let me paint you a picture of how I ended up declaring war on a suburban dictator. 6 months earlier, I was Marcus Bellamy, 45, recently divorced mechanical engineer looking for peace after 20 years of marriage imploded like a controlled demolition. I wanted quiet, maybe a small workshop where I could rebuild motorcycles and my life simultaneously. Willowbrook seemed perfect. The smell of fresh pine from the nearby forest hit me the moment I stepped out of my car. Clean, honest, like a promise of better days ahead. Systematic intimidation. Willowbrook, 67 homes filled with tech workers and government employees. Good people paying $180 monthly for landscaping and pool maintenance. What they were really funding was Karen's personal Gestapo, complete with fabricated violations and manufactured crisis. But here's what Karen didn't know about me. 20 years of marriage to a manipulative woman had taught me to recognize psychological warfare. And my engineering background meant I approached problems methodically. Karen thought she was dealing with another victim, another quiet neighbor who'd roll over and pay her extortion fees. She had no idea she'd just picked a fight with someone who specialized in solving complex problems through careful planning and precise execution. The smell of sawdust from my illegal shed mixed with pine needles as I realized something important. Karen's power came from fear and ignorance. Remove those and she was just another bully with a clipboard. I was about to become her worst nightmare. Someone who fought back. A week after the shed showdown, I discovered Karen's true superpower, manufacturing violations out of thin air. I'm checking my mail, still tasting the bitter morning coffee, when I spot the certified letter. Return address, Willowbrook, HOA. My stomach dropped like a stone into a deep well. Inside, a $200 fine for non-compliant exterior paint color violating community aesthetic standards. Attached was a blurry photo of my house and a demand for immediate repainting in approved community colors. I stared at that letter until the words blurred. My house was standard builder beige, the exact same color as half the neighborhood. I had the original paint receipts, the color codes, everything. This wasn't a mistake. This was psychological warfare. 20 minutes later, I'm standing in my garage comparing paint samples when the truth hit me like a sledgehammer to the gut. The color Karen claimed was required didn't exist anywhere in our original HOA documents. She'd fabricated an entire architectural requirement from scratch. But here's the thing about being married to a manipulative woman for 20 years. You learn to document everything. And my engineering training had taught me that complex problems require systematic solutions. First stop, County Records Office. 3 hours and $47 in copying fees later, I struck gold buried in page 247 of our original covenants. Any rule changes required formal approval by 60% of homeowners. Karen had been issuing emergency architectural guidelines with 0 community votes, essentially making up laws as she went along. I remember my old property law professor saying that most HOA disputes could be solved by actually reading the governing documents. Turned out he was right. Then I grabbed my camera for a little morning constitutional around Karen's personal palace. The irony was absolutely delicious. Her house violated 3 actual HOA rules. Fence 2 inches too high. Non-approved decorative shutters that screamed, "Look at me." A driveway extension that definitely wasn't in the original architectural plans. The click of my camera shutter in the crisp morning light felt like sweet justice. Dew sparkled on perfectly manicured grass as I documented every violation, building a photo gallery of Karen's stunning hypocrisy. But the real eye-opener came during my next fence-line conversation with Mrs. Rodriguez. "She destroyed the Patterson family," Maria whispered, glancing nervously toward Karen's house like she might be listening. "Forced them to spend $8,000 removing their deck. Called it non-compliant height variance. That deck was perfectly legal, built with city permits. Then there was young Sarah from Maple Street, cited for disruptive children during normal afternoon playtime. Karen had actually written up a 3-year-old for laughing too loudly in his own backyard. My personal favorite from Maria's horror stories. Karen once cited Mr. Williams for aggressive lawn mowing patterns because he dared cut his grass Saturday morning instead of Friday evening. Apparently, lawnmower noise before 10 a.m. constituted community harassment. I was dealing with someone who weaponized paperwork like other people used baseball bats. Time for my first counter-strike. I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board requesting all architectural approval records from the past 5 years. Under Texas Property Code, they had exactly 10 business days to comply. Karen's response was swift and predictable. Emergency HOA meeting to discuss community troublemakers threatening neighborhood stability. The community center's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps as only 12 residents trickled in. The fear factor was real. Most people would rather pay bogus fines than face Karen's wrath publicly. Karen strutted to the front in a powder blue cardigan that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment. "We have a serious problem," she announced, voice dripping with practiced concern. "A disruptive newcomer is attempting to undermine legitimate HOA authority through frivolous complaints and harassment." She pointed at me like I was patient zero in a neighborhood epidemic. "This individual refuses to comply with basic community standards and is creating a hostile environment for law-abiding residents." That's when I stood up, folder in hand, and smiled. "Funny thing about legitimate authority, Karen." I walked to the front, spreading photos across her folding table like evidence in a murder trial. "These photos show your fence violating Section 4.7 of our actual covenants. Your shutters violate Section 6.2. Your driveway extension violates Section 3.4. The room went cemetery quiet except for the air conditioning humming its mechanical lullaby. "Meanwhile," I continued, "the paint color you find me for. There's no such requirement anywhere in our binding documents. You made it up." Karen's face went through more color changes than a mood ring in a thunderstorm. "Those photos are taken out of context. My architectural choices were pre-approved by the board. Show me the paperwork." What she didn't know was that my phone had been recording everything. One-party consent state completely legal. Her stammering denials were now permanently documented. The board members, clearly Karen's hand-picked loyalists, refused to acknowledge my evidence. They needed to research the matter and consult legal counsel. Translation: nobody had taught them what to do when someone fought back with actual facts. As residents filed out in uncomfortable silence, I realized something crucial. Karen's entire empire was built on fear and the assumption that good people wouldn't call her bluff. Well, I just called her bluff with photographic evidence and legal documentation. And judging by how tightly she clutched that clipboard, she was starting to understand she'd picked the wrong engineer to intimidate. Karen's revenge came exactly 48 hours later, delivered with the precision of a predator who'd been planning this move for weeks. The certified letter was thicker this time, heavier. The kind of official envelope that makes your coffee taste like battery acid before you even break the seal. Violation notice. Commercial Vehicle Parking Ordinance 12.7b, $100 daily. Fine, effective immediately. Vehicle must be removed within 24 hours or face towing at owner's expense. The attached photo showed my work truck, a spotless Ford F-150 F-150 with my engineering firm's small magnetic door signs, parked legally in my own driveway, where it had sat every night for months. But here's where Karen's arrogance became her weakness. Right there in the same photo, barely cropped out, was Dave Petton's white pharmaceutical company sedan with MedTech solutions emblazoned across the back windshield. Apparently, selling pills wasn't commercial, but engineering was. I'd seen this playbook during my divorce. Create rules that apply to everyone except the rulemaker. Time to follow the money trail. The musty smell of aging paper and bureaucratic neglect filled the community center storage room. As I dug through 5 years of HOA financial records, what I discovered made my engineering brain spin with the pure audacity of the scam. Every major contract funneled money to Karen's family network. Premier Garden Solutions for landscaping owned by her brother-in-law, Rick. Pool maintenance, $800 monthly for work that should cost $200. Tree trimming, snow removal, even mailbox number replacements. All relatives charging triple market rates. Conservative calculation. $180,000 in community funds stolen over 5 years through this family conspiracy. But Karen was smart about it. Each contract looked legitimate on paper, just massively inflated. The kind of financial manipulation that required someone to actually read the fine print and do the math. My fence-line conversations with Mrs. Rodriguez became evening intelligence briefings. Maria had watched Karen's evolution from helpful neighbor to neighborhood dictator over 12 years. The Wilson family was her masterpiece, Maria whispered, glancing toward Karen's house like she might be listening through the walls. Forced them to replace their entire roof because the shingles were one shade too dark. $24,000. They moved rather than fight. The stories kept coming. Henderson family, $3,000 in fabricated fines. Elderly Kowalskis threatened with foreclosure over violations that existed only in Karen's imagination. But the pattern revealed something crucial. Karen targeted specific types of residents. Single parents, elderly couples, anyone who looked vulnerable or unlikely to fight back. She'd made a serious miscalculation with me. I found buried treasure in our original HOA charter. Any homeowner could trigger a presidential recall election with petition signatures from just 25% of residents. 17 signatures from 67 homes. Simple math. Achievable goal. My garage became Resistance headquarters, filled with the smell of fresh coffee and whispered conversations as Mrs. Rodriguez, the Patterson family, and Sarah formed my core recruitment team. We moved like underground fighters, gathering signatures and documenting Karen's crimes. But Karen had her own spy network. Mrs. Caldwell spotted our petition drive and immediately reported back. Karen's nuclear response came within hours. Official foreclosure threat letters to every resident with outstanding violation fees. That's when I learned something that made my blood freeze. Texas law actually allows HOAs to place liens on properties for unpaid violations, legitimate violations, and those liens can lead to foreclosure proceedings. Karen wasn't just stealing money. She was threatening to steal homes. I spent the weekend researching foreclosure law, coffee growing cold as I absorbed the terrifying reality. Yes, she could foreclose, but any judge would examine the validity of underlying violations. Karen's fabricated violations wouldn't survive legal scrutiny. The problem? Fighting bogus foreclosure could bankrupt families even if they won. Karen was using financial terrorism to maintain control. But she'd made one fatal assumption that I'd fold under pressure like everyone else. Instead, Tuesday morning brought a game-changing revelation. My research into surrounding properties had revealed something beautiful. 58 acres of prime farmland adjacent to our HOA boundary, available for purchase, affordable with my divorce settlement, and completely outside Karen's jurisdiction. I was reviewing property surveys when my phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Bellamy, this is Detective Morrison with Financial Crimes Division. We've received a complaint about HOA fund irregularities in your neighborhood. Could we schedule a meeting? My heart hammered against my ribs. Someone else had discovered Karen's embezzlement. Absolutely, detective, but I think you should know. I've been documenting evidence of systematic financial fraud for weeks. When can we meet? How about this afternoon? And Mr. Bellamy, bring everything you've got. As I hung up, I realized Karen's empire was about to face attacks from multiple directions. Legal pressure from law enforcement, community pressure from the recall petition, and soon strategic pressure from property she couldn't control. She thought she was fighting one divorced engineer with a grudge. She had no idea she was about to face a perfect storm that would destroy everything she'd built. Detective Morrison's call lit a fire under Karen that made her previous tactics look like gentle suggestions. Within 48 hours, every resident who'd signed my petition received identical letters from Architectural Compliance Solutions, a company that materialized out of nowhere like a bureaucratic phantom. $500 for mandatory structural integrity inspections to ensure community safety standards. My inspection notice came with a personal touch. Critical foundation drainage issues requiring immediate remediation. Estimated correction cost, $12,000. I stared at that estimate while the smell of fresh sawdust from my workshop reminded me why I'd moved here in the first place. $12,000 to fix drainage problems that didn't exist on a foundation that was structurally perfect. Karen had escalated from petty harassment to full-blown extortion. But she'd made one crucial mistake, trying to con an engineer with engineering. My buddy Jake from the firm owed me a favor from when I'd covered his project deadlines during his messy custody. Battle. One phone call brought him over with professional equipment that cost more than Karen's Lexus. "Marcus, your foundation is solid as bedrock," Jake announced after a thorough inspection. Ground-penetrating radar results spread across my kitchen table. Whoever wrote this report either failed basic structural engineering or they're running a scam. That's when we discovered the beautiful truth. Architectural Compliance Solutions had zero actual architectural credentials. The company was registered to one Rick Pemberton, Karen's brother-in-law, who ran the overpriced landscaping operation, the same family network, the same financial fraud, just wearing a different corporate costume. I spent that evening mapping Karen's money trail with the methodical precision my ex-wife used to hate. HOA funds to fake inspections to family businesses back to Karen's personal enrichment. Conservative estimate she'd stolen over $200,000 across 5 years through various manufactured crises and phantom services. The next community meeting felt like a powder keg soaked in gasoline just waiting for someone to strike a match. Karen arrived in full battle armor, navy blazer, perfectly styled hair, and a briefcase that probably contained more fabricated violations. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows as she surveyed the room like a general reviewing troops before battle. "Unfortunately, recent inspections have revealed serious safety violations throughout our community," she announced, voice dripping with manufactured concern. "These issues require immediate professional intervention to protect property values and resident safety." That's when I stood up with Jake's professional engineering report in hand. "Funny thing about professional intervention, Karen, I brought an actual structural engineer to inspect my property." I held up the report like evidence in a murder trial. Turns out my foundation is perfectly sound. No drainage issues, no structural problems, nothing requiring $12,000 in repairs. The room's silence was so complete you could hear the air conditioning cycling through its mechanical rhythm. Furthermore, I continued walking to the front, "Your Architectural Compliance Solutions isn't licensed by the Texas Board of Professional Engineers. It's owned by Rick Pemberton, your brother-in-law who's been overcharging us for landscaping." Karen's face went through more color changes than a sunset. "Those accusations are completely unfounded. Rick's company provides legitimate services. Show me their engineering credentials." The beautiful thing about demanding proof from someone running a scam is watching them realize they can't manufacture credentials as easily as they manufacture violations. But Karen wasn't finished. Her nuclear option came the next morning. A formal complaint filed with the city, claiming I was operating an unlicensed business from residential property. She'd weaponized my woodworking hobby, claiming my weekend projects constituted commercial manufacturing activity. The city inspector who showed up was a grizzled veteran named Tom, who'd probably seen every property scam Austin had to offer. "Sir, I've got a complaint about commercial activity," he said, clipboard in hand. "Mind if I take a look around?" 20 minutes later, Tom was shaking his head and chuckling. "Son, you've got a nice hobby shop here. Couple hand tools, some lumber. If this is commercial activity, then every dad in Texas with a garage is running an illegal business." That's when Tom shared something interesting. "You know, we've been getting a lot of complaints from this neighborhood lately. Same person filing reports. Usually turns out to be neighbor disputes rather than actual code violations. Karen's pattern of abuse was finally coming to light through official channels. But the real breakthrough came when I started researching the property around our neighborhood. That's when I discovered something that would change the entire game. 58 acres of prime farmland directly adjacent to our HOA boundary. The elderly farmer who owned it was ready to sell. His family wanted out of agriculture. The asking price was reasonable with my divorce settlement funds. And here's the beautiful part. The property included water rights and the access road that connected our entire area to the main highway. Control that land, and you controlled infrastructure that Karen desperately needed for her secret development plans. I'd stumbled across the leverage that could end her reign. Forever. As I stood on that property, breathing air that smelled like freedom and possibility, I realized Karen had been playing chess while I'd been learning the rules. But now I was about to flip the entire board. The manila folder that changed everything was sitting in a dusty box marked Property Easements 2019 to 2023. I'd been organizing the farm property paperwork when I found correspondence the previous owner had apparently forgotten to take with him. Precision. "You've got them dead to rights," she said, reviewing my evidence folder that had grown thick as a phone book. "The development conspiracy alone is criminal fraud. But here's what's really beautiful. Your agricultural property gives you leverage they can't touch." She explained something called agricultural exemption that made my engineer heart sing with its elegant simplicity. Under Texas law, legitimate farming activity trumps almost every other land use regulation. My 58 acres weren't just outside Karen's jurisdiction. They were legally protected from the kind of development interference she'd been planning. Even better, I could legally restrict access across my property for any non-agricultural use. The road Karen's developers needed, I controlled it completely. Time to build the perfect trap. The steel gate went up on a Tuesday morning when Karen was at her weekly hair appointment. 8 foot tall, professional-grade construction, electronic locks that would make a bank jealous. The metallic clang of welding equipment echoed across the farmland like a declaration of war. My contractor, a grizzled veteran named Pete who'd built half the security systems in Austin, whistled appreciatively as we tested the lock mechanism. "Son, this gate could stop a tank." "What exactly are you trying to keep out?" "Corruption," I said simply. While Pete finished the installation, I established legitimate farming operations that would satisfy any legal challenge. Cover crops planted in neat rows, irrigation system connected to my water rights, agricultural tax exemption paperwork filed with the county. The smell of fresh earth and honest work reminded me why I'd fallen in love with this area. But this wasn't just about farming. This was about creating an unassailable legal position. Mrs. Rodriguez became my intelligence coordinator, tracking Karen's movements like a surveillance operative. The Patterson family monitored social media for Karen's recruitment efforts. Sarah watched for any signs that Karen was preparing new attacks. Our communication network used encrypted group messages that would have made CIA operatives proud. We were suburbanites planning a revolution, one carefully documented violation at a time. The evidence organization took 3 full evenings. Financial records showing the embezzlement pattern. Photos of selective enforcement. Audio recordings of Karen's threats and intimidation tactics. Timeline documenting the development conspiracy. Everything arranged in chronological order with exhibits labeled like a federal prosecution case because that's exactly what this was becoming. My research into agricultural law revealed something delicious. Previous easements could be challenged if they were obtained through fraud or misrepresentation. Karen's secret development deal meant she'd been planning this betrayal while negotiating those easements 2 years ago. Full disclosure of intended use was legally required. She'd violated that requirement spectacularly. But the real master stroke was reaching out to the displaced homeowners. Families who still technically owned HOA properties despite moving away to escape Karen's harassment. 3 families, 3 votes Karen didn't know still existed. The Hendersons were living in Round Rock after Karen's manufactured crisis cost them $8,000. The Kowalskis had moved to assisted living after her foreclosure threats. Terrified them into selling below market value. The Martinez family, different from my attorney, was renting across town while their Willowbrook house sat empty, afraid to return, but unable to sell at Karen's artificially depressed prices. All 3 families retained voting rights. All 3 were furious about Karen's systematic abuse. All 3 were eager to participate in her downfall. That gave me a voting bloc Karen couldn't account for in her summer vacation strategy. The media strategy came together when I contacted Rebecca Walsh, the Austin Chronicle reporter who'd been investigating suburban development corruption. She was fascinated by the David versus Goliath angle, especially with the financial crimes component. This is exactly the kind of story that exposes how these little dictators operate, Rebecca said over coffee that tasted like justice. One woman destroying an entire community for personal profit. When can we schedule the interview? I coordinated everything for maximum impact, agricultural inspector visit to verify legitimate farming activity. Gate installation completion, media interview timing, all scheduled for the week leading up to Karen's planned emergency HOA meeting. The technical setup was flawless. Gate remote access programmed for emergency vehicles. Security cameras positioned to document any interference attempts. Legal signage posted private agricultural property. Authorized access only. Electronic locks with backup power. Systems because Karen seemed like the type who'd try cutting electricity lines. As I stood on my property that evening breathing air that smelled like freedom and fresh possibilities, I realized something important. This wasn't just about stopping one corrupt HOA president. This was about proving that ordinary people could fight back against petty tyrants using nothing but patience, documentation, and strategic thinking. Karen thought she was dealing with another victim she could intimidate into submission. Tomorrow she'd discover she'd picked a fight with someone who turned problem-solving into an art form. Karen's response to my gate installation was swift, vicious, and completely predictable. The first attack came at 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday. My security cameras caught a figure in dark clothing systematically cutting irrigation lines with wire cutters moving through my property like a suburban commando on a demolition mission. The morning revealed the scope of damage. 17 sprinkler heads smashed, irrigation control box vandalized, and my newly planted cover crops trampled with deliberate malice. The crunch of broken plastic under my boots as I surveyed the destruction sounded like someone stepping on my dreams. But Karen had made a crucial tactical error, attacking property protected by high-definition security cameras with night vision capability. The footage was beautiful. Clear shots of someone approximately Karen's height and build wearing clothing identical to what she'd worn to previous HOA meetings. Even better, the cameras captured her vehicle's license plate as she fled the scene. I forwarded everything to Detective Morrison with a note. Additional evidence of criminal activity related to ongoing investigation. Karen's legal harassment escalated to nuclear levels. Frivolous lawsuit claiming agricultural smells would harm property values. County complaint demanding revocation of my agricultural designation. City petition to declare my property abandoned based on the previous owner's neglect. Each legal challenge cost me time and attorney fees, but Sarah Martinez was earning every penny. She's panicking. My lawyer observed. Desperate people make mistakes, and Karen's making them faster than we can document them. The social media war launched simultaneously. Karen created a Facebook group called Concerned Willowbrook Residents and began posting photos of my property with captions about industrial encroachment and toxic agricultural chemicals threatening our children. My favorite post showed my organic fertilizer spreader with the caption "Dangerous chemical equipment spotted near elementary school bus route." The woman was claiming that composted cow manure constituted an environmental hazard. But Karen's masterpiece came when someone and the security footage left little doubt who dumped construction debris near my gate. Then called county code enforcement claiming I was illegally disposing of industrial waste. BC The county inspector who responded was the same Tom who'd investigated Karen's previous fabricated complaints about my commercial workshop. He took one look at the debris pile and started shaking his head. Mr. Bellamy, this is bathroom tile and old fixtures," Tom said, examining the evidence. "Unless you've been renovating bathrooms in your barn, this isn't from agricultural activity." That's when Tom shared something interesting. The debris included specific tile patterns he'd seen during Karen's recent bathroom renovation inspection. Same marble, same fixtures, same manufacturer stamps. Karen had literally dumped her own renovation waste on my property, then called authorities claiming I'd put it there. "Sir, I've been doing this job for 15 years, Tom continued. "This is the most obvious false reporting case I've ever seen. We'll be recommending criminal charges for filing fraudulent complaints." But the real escalation came through Karen's community pressure campaign. She organized a petition demanding my gate removal, claiming agricultural activities created health and safety hazards for neighborhood children. The petition gained some signatures, though I suspected many residents signed out of fear rather than conviction. Karen had spent years training people that opposing her meant facing manufactured crises and financial harassment. Then came the bribery attempt. Karen appeared at my gate on a sunny Thursday afternoon, dressed in her most authoritative cardigan and carrying what looked like an official folder. The electronic lock buzzed as I approached, but I didn't open the gate. "Marcus, I think we can reach a reasonable compromise," she said through the steel mesh, voice sweet as artificial honey. "I'm prepared to drop all current violations and guarantee no future harassment if you remove this gate and abandon the agricultural designation." I let her continue, my phone recording everything from my pocket. "We could even arrange for the HOA to compensate you for any inconvenience, say $5,000 for your trouble." There it was. Karen Pemberton on recorded audio attempting to bribe me into abandoning property rights that threatened her development conspiracy. "That's very generous, Karen," I replied calmly. "Can I get that offer in writing with your signature?" Her face went through several interesting color changes before settling on panicked red. "Well, obviously any agreement would need board approval and legal review." "Of course. Let me know when you have that written offer ready." As she hurried back to her Lexus, I realized something important. Karen was making increasingly desperate moves because her entire timeline was collapsing. The development deal had deadlines. The investigation was gaining momentum. My agricultural operation was becoming more established every day. She was running out of time and options. That evening, Rebecca Walsh called with perfect timing. "Marcus, I'm ready to publish the investigation piece. Any final thoughts before we go to print tomorrow?" "Just one," I said, watching the sunset paint my farmland in golden light. "Sometimes the best way to stop a bully is giving them enough rope to hang themselves." Karen had been weaving that rope for months. Tomorrow, the whole community would see exactly what she'd been building. The Austin Chronicle article hit online at 6 a.m. Thursday morning with a headline that made my coffee taste like victory. "Suburban Dictator Secret Development Deal. How one HOA president embezzled thousands while planning community betrayal." Rebecca Walsh had done magnificent work. Photos of my gate, financial records showing Karen's family enrichment scheme, quotes from displaced residents, everything laid out with journalistic precision that would make Karen's denials impossible. Karen's response was immediate and unhinged. By 9 a.m., every resident received an emergency email calling for a community safety meeting to address dangerous misinformation being spread by a mentally unstable individual with documented history of aggressive behavior toward community leadership. She was claiming I was mentally unstable. On the record in writing, my phone rang before I finished reading her email. "Mr. Bellamy, this is Officer Williams with Austin PD. We received a complaint about threatening statements made toward a community leader. Could we schedule a meeting to discuss this matter?" Karen had called the police, claiming I'd made specific threats against her safety, completely fabricated, but forcing me to waste time defending against manufactured charges while she scrambled to control the narrative. "Officer Williams, I'd be happy to meet, but you should know I have security footage documenting this person's recent vandalism of my property, plus audio recordings of her attempting to bribe me. When would be convenient?" The officer's tone shifted immediately. "Sir, could you bring those recordings when we meet this afternoon?" While I prepared evidence for law enforcement, Karen launched her final desperate gambit, attempting to invoke eminent domain principles for community safety. The emergency HOA meeting notice claimed authority to regulate external threats to community welfare and proposed new rules requiring HOA approval for any adjacent property activities. She was literally trying to extend her jurisdiction beyond the legal boundaries. But Karen's most dangerous move was her smear campaign targeting my professional reputation. She contacted my engineering firm, claiming I was exhibiting obsessive behavior dangerous to community safety and suggesting my property activities indicated mental instability requiring professional intervention. My boss Dave called within hours. "Marcus, I got a weird call about you today. Something about mental health concerns and community disputes. What the hell is going on?" 20 minutes later, Dave was laughing and asking for copies of my security footage. "This woman sounds certifiably insane. Sue her for defamation if she contacts us again." But Karen wasn't finished. Someone reported a chemical spill on my agricultural property Thursday evening, bringing emergency responders racing to investigate environmental contamination that didn't exist. The firefighters found exactly what I expected them to find. Organic fertilizer properly applied according to agricultural guidelines. No chemicals, no contamination, no emergency. "Sir, whoever reported this either doesn't understand farming or they're wasting emergency resources," the fire captain told me. "We'll be filing a report about the false alarm." Investigation of the phone records later revealed the call came from a number registered to Karen's address. Filing false emergency reports was a Class A misdemeanor in Texas. Karen had just committed a crime that could result in actual jail time, but the community fractures were becoming visible. Some residents genuinely believed Karen's safety claims, while others began researching her accusations and discovering lies. The Patterson family openly defended me at informal gatherings. Mrs. Rodriguez organized coffee meetings to share factual information about my agricultural activities. Karen's financial desperation reached fever pitch when Meridian Development threatened to withdraw their offer. The consultation fee she'd been counting on would evaporate unless access issues were resolved by month's end. I learned this through a phone conversation she apparently didn't realize could be overheard from my property line. Her voice carried across the evening air as she promised someone she would handle the farming problem permanently by the weekend. Permanently. That word made my blood run cold. Friday morning brought the final escalation, a direct purchase offer from Meridian Development. $800,000 for property I'd bought for $340,000. The offer included immediate gate removal and agricultural cessation as closing conditions. The cover letter was beautifully revealing. "This offer expires at 5 p.m. Friday. Failure to accept will result in alternative methods for resolving access requirements." Alternative methods. They weren't even trying to hide the threats anymore. I called Detective Morrison immediately. "I think you need to know that I'm receiving direct threats related to the HOA investigation and I have evidence that Karen's been filing false police reports. Mr. Bellamy, can you come in this afternoon? We're ready to move forward with charges and your additional evidence might help us upgrade the severity." As I drove to the police station with my carefully organized evidence files, I realized Karen had made every possible mistake. Criminal vandalism, filing false reports, attempted bribery, professional defamation, misuse of emergency services. She transformed from petty HOA tyrant into documented criminal, all while being recorded and photographed. Tomorrow's community meeting would be her last stand, but Karen didn't know that Detective Morrison would be attending as well. The hunter had definitely become the hunted. Friday evening arrived with the electric tension of a thunderstorm about to break. The community center parking lot filled like an amphitheater before gladiator combat with 47 residents attending, triple the usual turnout. Karen arrived in full battle armor, navy power suit, briefcase thick as a Bible, and two men in expensive suits who screamed legal representation. She'd prepared for war. What she hadn't prepared for was Detective Morrison sitting quietly in the back row taking notes. My coordination was military precise. The displaced homeowners, Henderson, Kowalski, and Martinez families, had returned specifically for tonight's vote. Agricultural Inspector Williams sat ready to verify my farming activities if questioned. Rebecca Walsh positioned her camera for maximum impact. And outside, my gate stood illuminated by LED flood lights like a monument to property rights, streaming live security footage to expose any sabotage attempts. Karen called the meeting to order with gavel strikes that sounded like gunshots. "We face an unprecedented crisis," she announced, voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute control. "External commercial interests are threatening our community's safety and property values through intimidation and manufactured controversies." She pointed at me like I was harboring weapons of mass destruction. "This individual has created a spite property designed to harass residents and obstruct legitimate community development." That's when I stood up with my evidence folders. 5 years of documentation that would destroy her empire in the next 20 minutes. "Karen, let's talk about manufactured controversies." I walked to the front, spreading photos across her podium like evidence in a murder trial. "Here's security footage of you vandalizing my irrigation system at 2:47 a.m. last Thursday." The projection screen filled with crystal clear our video of Karen systematically destroying my property. The room went silent except for the air conditioning humming overhead and someone's sharp intake of breath. "Here's audio recording of you offering me a $5,000 bribe to abandon my legal property rights." Karen's voice filled the room through speakers. "We could arrange for the HOA to compensate you for any inconvenience. Say $5,000 for your trouble." Her face cycled through colors I didn't know existed in nature. "Those recordings are taken out of context." I was attempting to reach reasonable compromise. Context. I clicked to the next slide. "Let's discuss context. These are financial records showing you've embezzled $200,000 through family business contracts, pool maintenance, landscaping, fake inspections, all overcharged through relatives." The mathematical precision appealed to my engineering brain. Each fraudulent contract displayed with market rate comparisons. The theft was undeniable. Mrs. Rodriguez stood up from the audience. "I want to speak." Her voice shook but carried steel underneath. "Karen forced my neighbor to spend $8,000 removing a legal deck. She cited my grandson for laughing too loudly in his own yard. She's terrorized this community for years." Then Patterson family patriarch rose. "She threatened foreclosure over violations that didn't exist. We have elderly neighbors who moved away because they were afraid of this woman. Sarah from Maple Street joined them. She cited my toddler for Christmas decorations in January. What kind of person attacks children for spreading joy?" The witness parade continued as residents finally felt safe to speak truth to power. Karen's supporters, her hand-picked board members, sat speechless as community after community story revealed the systematic abuse they'd enabled. But Karen wasn't finished. "All of this is orchestrated lies by someone seeking to profit from industrial development. Mr. Bellamy represents outside commercial interests threatening our residential character." That's when Detective Morrison stepped forward, badge gleaming under fluorescent lights. "Ma'am, I'm Detective Morrison with Austin PD Financial Crimes Division. We've been investigating allegations of embezzlement and fraud related to this HOA." You could have heard a pin drop on carpet. Mr. Bellamy has provided extensive evidence of financial irregularities, including what appears to be systematic theft of community funds through inflated contracts with family businesses. Karen's legal representation tried to whisper urgent advice, but Detective Morrison continued. "Additionally, we're filing charges related to filing false police reports, criminal vandalism captured on security footage, and misuse of emergency services. Miss Pemberton, you have the right to remain silent." The handcuffs clicked like gunshots in the deadly quiet room. Karen's final words as she was escorted out. "This is all orchestrated. He's manipulating evidence. You people don't understand what you're doing." The irony was beautiful. Karen claiming manipulation while being arrested for manipulating community finances, fabricating violations, and terrorizing residents through systematic fraud. With Karen removed, the board voted unanimously to suspend all her fabricated violations and fees. Emergency motion passed to audit HOA finances with independent accountants. As residents filed out into the night air, many stopped to apologize for believing Karen's lies. The community that had been divided by fear was finally united by truth. Outside, my gate stood unchanged. No longer a symbol of spite, but a monument to the simple principle that property rights matter and bullies eventually face consequences. Rebecca Walsh's closing question summed it up perfectly. How does it feel to know that one locked gate brought down 12 years of corruption? Sometimes, I replied, the best defense against a tyrant is simply refusing to be terrorized. 3 weeks after Karen's arrest, Willowbrook felt like a neighborhood that had collectively exhaled after holding its breath for 12 years. The new HOA board election brought genuine representation for the first time in over a decade. Mrs. Rodriguez was elected president by unanimous vote. The Patterson family patriarch became treasurer with a mandate to implement financial transparency that would prevent future corruption. Sarah from Maple Street took the secretary position, promising that families with children would never again be targeted for manufactured violations. The financial recovery was swift and satisfying. Karen's guilty plea to embezzlement, fraud, and filing false reports resulted in 18 months probation, and court-ordered restitution of $200,000 to the community. Her family's overpriced contracts were immediately cancelled, saving residents over $2,000 annually in HOA fees. Property values stabilized as word spread that the neighborhood dictator was gone. The Henderson family moved back. The Kowalskis returned from assisted living to their beautifully maintained home. The community that Karen had fractured through fear was healing through connection. My 58-acre farm became something I'd never originally planned. A genuine community asset. Weekend farmers markets brought residents together over fresh tomatoes and herbs that smelled like hope and new beginnings. The CSA program allowed neighbors to purchase produce shares, creating economic connections that strengthened social bonds. The gate that had symbolized division now welcomed visitors with community farm all-welcome signage. My security cameras still monitored the property, but now they captured children laughing on walking trails rather than vandals destroying irrigation systems. The conservation easement I established permanently protected the land from high-density development, ensuring that Karen's original betrayal could never be repeated. Meridian Development Corporation withdrew their expansion plans entirely, leaving our green space preserved for future generations. But the real transformation was cultural. Monthly community meetings became collaborative problem-solving sessions instead of Karen's dictatorial pronouncements. New bylaws prevented any president from serving more than 6 consecutive years. Financial transparency requirements included quarterly reports available to every homeowner. The ripple effects extended beyond Willowbrook. My story gained national attention as an example of fighting HOA abuse through documentation and strategic thinking. Other communities dealing with similar dictatorial presidents reached out for advice. Sarah Martinez started a legal practice specializing in HOA disputes, using my case as a blueprint for defeating corrupt boards. The gate strategy became a model studied by property rights advocates. Sometimes the best way to fight unreasonable authority is positioning yourself beyond its reach while maintaining leverage over their plans. Detective Morrison's investigation expanded into other HOA corruption cases across Austin. Rebecca Walsh won a state journalism award for her investigation that exposed the broader pattern of suburban financial fraud. A documentary filmmaker contacted me about the larger story of HOA abuse nationwide. But the most satisfying change was personal. My workshop garage became the neighborhood gathering place where residents shared projects and problems. The community that divorce had forced me to leave behind was replaced by genuine connections built through shared struggle and mutual support. Karen's aftermath was less satisfying than I'd hoped. She moved away after serving probation, attempting to join a new HOA board in Dallas before background checks revealed her criminal record. Her reputation in property management circles became a cautionary tale about what happens when power corrupts. Absolutely. The annual Agricultural Heritage Festival we established draws families from across Austin to celebrate farming history and property rights. Children who once feared HOA citations now gather eggs from heritage chickens and learn that standing up to bullies sometimes requires patience, documentation, and strategic thinking. Last week, Mrs. Rodriguez asked me something that made me realize how completely our community had transformed. Marcus, would you consider running for city council? We need someone who knows how to fight corruption and build something positive from the aftermath. I'm still considering her suggestion, but for now, I'm content with the sound of children's laughter echoing across fields where Karen once planned to build condominiums, and the knowledge that sometimes ordinary people can defeat powerful bullies using nothing more than truth, patience, and one perfectly positioned locked gate. Share your HOA nightmare stories in the comments. You're not alone in fighting suburban dictators. And hit that subscribe button if you want to see more David vs. Goliath victories where documentation and strategy defeat corruption. Because the next time someone tries to tell you that you can't fight City Hall, or in this case, the HOA board, remember that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be intimidated.